Time to down tools for a bit. Welcome to the ToolShed, the influential podcast for anyone and everyone involved in the building industry. Here's your host, Mick Hawes.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. We're always trying to bring you information that's going to make your life as a builder much easier. So give us a thumbs up and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of the ToolShed. If you've listened to past episodes of the ToolShed podcast, we have had conversations about mental health, and we have had conversations about suicide and suicide prevention and how we are to deal with it. And one of the conversations that I had with Sonja Bottern, who's one of our guests, because we got two guests at once. You get two for the price of one today. We had a conversation in relation to how do we better prepare and what level of responsibility do we need to take to help somebody who is feeling like they don't want to be here anymore or wants to harm themselves or is disconnected or what have you. And this had affected me personally earlier in the year because one of our yacht club members, I'm a member of a yacht club, and one of our members took his own life earlier in the year, and I spoke to him, or just in passing, the week before it happened, and it wasn't until I heard the news that he took his own life that it sort of caused me to think, hang on, that last time I sort of had that brief encounter with him, something didn't feel right. And I couldn't help but think that did I do or did I not do something that I should have done? And you start to develop feelings of guilt because there might have been something you could have done. But, you know, in retrospect, it was just a kind of a normal interaction. And it's only after the fact that I started to question myself. But I think it's a really good topic of conversation to open up the psychology behind it and all of the feelings that happen when this sort of thing happens, and what can we do and how can we better prepare for helping the people around us when they're having some dark days. So I'd like to welcome Sonja and Greg. So this is Greg's first time. Sonja's, I think, a triple offender or something. This is your third or fourth time. I don't know. You're a repeat offender anyway. So, Sonja, I'll ask you first to introduce Greg as far as how did you end up in a, I'm not going to say a relationship with Greg, but what is your relationship with Greg, and what motivated you to suggest that we have this conversation?
Thank you, Mick. Great to be here as a third-time offender. So Greg and I worked as colleagues at Jesuit Social Services in the support after suicide team. Greg was the manager, Victorian manager for the bereavement counselling team. And I guess that was the first introduction. And we built a friendship up. Recently, he then left Jesuit Social Services and we continued our friendship. And what I've valued and learned, I've learned a lot, I guess, around. Greg works very much with the somatic, so working with the body and how the body is affected after grief. And so that's been a real eye-opener for me, understanding also communication, that we know communication is more than just the words. So helping me understand a lot more about that field.
Yeah,
so
brilliant.
That's an interest from both of us, yeah.
So, Greg, let's hear a little bit about your background. I don't know how far we need to go back, where you were born and that sort of stuff, but how did you get involved in this space? Because I just find it fascinating, the twists and turns that our lives take, where we end up, because there is no way that I was remotely going to be doing anything like I'm doing now when I left school and was an apprentice electrician and a professional musician and all that sort of stuff, and now I'm doing this. I never thought I would. But when you look back, it was a logical progression as to how I ended up here. What's the logical progression for you?
All right, so very good to be here. I don't know that it's necessarily a logical progression, so I'll try and give you a bit of a potted background. So I'm a bit of a country lad. So I was born and grew up in Ballarat in Victoria. And probably the first key thing that's relevant to what we're talking about is when I was 11 years old, sadly, I had an older brother who worked as a plumber, had not long gone into his own business after working for other people, and he took his own life. And so that had a big impact on myself and my family. So this is back in the 1970s, giving away my age a bit here. But, so I was okay at school, but I started to get a bit disillusioned. So I left school when I was just under 16. Teachers tried to keep me in there because they thought I was okay at schoolwork, but I just wanted to get out of that situation. And I took up a traineeship as a potter, of all things. So working with a production potter that had his own business, sort of doing domestic ware, we called it. So like mugs and plates and cups and all that sort of stuff. So I did 4 years traineeship with him, and then went into business with another potter, and we set up our own business together up in Ballarat, and did that for a few years till my early 30s. The crossover probably to where I am now was when I was about 20. I had a bit of an interest in martial arts, but I took up the practice of Tai Chi, and then eventually went on to train as an instructor in Tai Chi. And it was there that after classes, people would hang around and have a bit of a chat. And I started working in neighbourhood houses, teaching Tai Chi. And if we move forward again, it started to become really difficult to earn a living as a potter in the late 1980s. Like financially, things were not great in the world. And so I started thinking about, okay, how am I going to earn an income? So I started retraining. So initially out of the Tai Chi, I trained as a massage therapist, started working in community health, noticed how when I was working as a massage therapist, I actually trained in Geelong. And so part of our training was working with the Geelong Footy Club. So, you'd sort of be doing massage, but then blokes or people would start chatting to you about what was going on in their life. And then that eventually led to thinking about, it seems like that's something I'm interested in. So I went back to uni, something I never thought I'd do, having left school at the age I did, and social work degree. And then along the way, working in community health, did a lot of stuff in men's health, which I realised at the time was sort of out of interest with my brother's situation. Like being a trainee, he seemed pretty happy-go-lucky. How did he get to that point? How did he not feel that he could not talk to someone? He seemed like someone connected in the community. He was part of a car club. And so I started to sort of get involved with men's health, started up a few men's groups on the Ballarat Peninsula out of Geelong. For a while, worked in once I'd done my social work degree, a men and family relationships program in Geelong, and then helped start a bereaved fathers group in Geelong. And so that sort of led along the way. And then from there, I've worked mostly in grief, bereavement and trauma work, but always had an interest in grief and bereavement, but particularly around the topic of suicide and suicide bereavement, and how that interest in how do people sort of have ways to connect with each other. And we were just chatting before that the start of what we're chatting about today and what we're starting is a conversation where we were talking about the effect of people feeling a level of disconnected from others, but also feeling that it's something they can't talk about. So how do we start to build a community where people feel more like they're a bit connected, but they can also perhaps talk about something that's going on for them, and just, it's almost like at a very grassroots level, how do we, in our day-to-day conversations, and a bit like you said, Mick, sort of wondering about those passing conversations, how can they both be brief conversations that might be helpful, but are there ways or are there opportunities that we can notice stuff and we can pause a little bit and just say to someone, hey, you seem a bit off today, to how you normally are, and see where that goes.
You mentioned, your brother it was a surprise because he was kind of normal, outgoing, that sort of thing. And I'm sort of leading to this question that I don't really have an answer to. I think I do one day, and then I think I don't the next. So I just want to throw it at you to see where we end up with it. And it's the question of responsibility. And with the example that I used at the introduction, one of the members of the yacht club, and I spoke to him the week before, and in retrospect, he was a bit off. And then when I found out the news, it was like, should I have said something? And I went down that track and started to feel guilty about I didn't do what I should have done and all of that. But the question that I struggle with is what, and we can just use me as an example, what is my level of responsibility in all of this and in other people's lives? Because, part of why people, I guess, go down that track is, as you said, they're disconnected, but they may feel guilty about something or what have you. And like, I felt really guilty that I didn't do enough. And then I stand back from it and go, but I didn't know. Like, I didn't know what I didn't know.
That's right.
And so what are your thoughts on, us as individuals? What is our responsibility to be looking out for, supporting, helping people around us? What are your thoughts on that? Because it's a deep question and I don't have any answers yet.
Yeah, it is. It's a big question, and it's something we've talked about a lot in what we're developing because it's really important. I think, I'll just start from what comes to me and then sort of build from there, I think, because one thing we noticed is that some trainings or things that are out there like Safe Talk, assist training, mental health first aid, all of those sorts of things are really good. But what they do at the end of the day is sort of give people a way of going, okay, I've got to a point of feeling like something's not right, so I'm going to hand responsibility over to a mental health service. I'm going to suggest the person goes to a mental health service. I'm going to suggest they maybe go to the hospital or they talk to their GP. And so what we're talking about, which is your point, I think, of aside from that, if we connect with someone in the street and we notice there's something up, how do we deal with any feelings of responsibility? But I think important in what you're saying is the responsibility of the other person as well, and having conversations where it's clear what you're able to do, willing to do, but also allowing the other person to still have their own responsibility. And that's a really difficult thing because there will, I think, be times where you walk away from a conversation perhaps and you think, that felt like a really important conversation and a good conversation, but I'm still not sure that they're going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, I had another conversation with another friend of mine a couple of months ago who just sort of went, radio silence for maybe 4 or so weeks, and eventually spoke to that person, and they admitted that they'd been suffering from a pretty horrible bout of depression. It's not suicidal. I don't believe it was, but a very dark place. not the first time it's happened. In my approach, I sort of said, "Oh, that's terrible," and did my best to empathise. But I didn't. I did make some suggestions about what, like, other connections that I have, people that I could put that person in touch with. And in that conversation, because it was a phone conversation, they kind of went, "Oh, yeah," and you could just tell that it's like, I don't want that. I'm not interested in that. And you're sort of saying that they have a certain level of responsibility, which I agree with, but I also understand that when you're in that space mentally, it's really hard to make smart decisions. Like, it's just, it's the opposite of what you feel like doing is what you should do when you're in that situation. Fortunately, that person did sort of, a few weeks later say, are you around? I do want to catch up. And we sat down and we had a brilliant chat for about an hour and a half. And I did offer a pathway to get some preventative help, because if it's happened in the past, it's probably going to happen again in the future. And they showed interest in that. I've caught up with them since, and they haven't done anything about it. So that comes back to their responsibility again. But maybe Sonja, if you want to give me your thoughts on this question, because I'm just trying to gather as much information as I can. It's just such a difficult question. Where does our responsibility start and finish to help and protect, the people around us?
I mean, I think, as you've both said, it is a difficult question. And my personal belief is that there is probably only so much you can do, and that at the end of the day, the person with the thoughts needs to be making what they feel is the right decision for them. I guess what we're talking about is creating opportunities where people can feel connected enough to other people that they might feel more willing to share, even way before they start feeling suicidal, arguably, but even when they feel like it's okay, or there is someone or a community or people that they can talk with and feel safe with to say, actually, I'm struggling right now. What we know about people who have got to the point of having suicidal thoughts is they often feel very disconnected from people around them. And that can be even if they have friends and family, which is why friends and family often struggle when somebody makes a decision to take their lives, because their thinking is, but what about us? We're here, we could support you. But in fact, the person who's feeling suicidal, for whatever reason, is just feeling like there isn't anybody who cares or notices or is invested enough. So we're talking about the notion of, if we can just provide touch points. And when we talk about connecting, we don't mean you have to share your entire life story. But we spoke about my father, and as you know, I spoke about 3 years ago, he took his life. When we moved home, I remembered one of the things he said before we moved was, he was really upset about the fact that he was leaving people that he knew behind. And we said, who? You don't really have a lot of friends. My father just didn't have a lot of friends. And he said things like, well, where I go and get my coffee, they know what coffee I like. And there's the hairdresser. And he pointed a few out. And I remember dismissing it, thinking, well, they're not friends, so you'll make new friends, when we move. But in fact, I can't say it is simplistic. It's too simplistic to say that's the only reason he took his life. But I think that was one of the catalysts for him, that when he moved, he suddenly became a nobody again. He felt like he wasn't connected in anywhere and with anyone. And so that's why we often say your hairdressers and your baristas are people who are important, because there is a natural way of creating a connection and an opportunity for people to build on that connection. So the first time it might just be, what do you want? You want a cappuccino. Next time is, oh, you want that cappuccino, don't you? Oh, that's right, you like extra froth. Great. Next time, like, what was your name? And so somebody can then feel like they're no longer by themselves. So that's really all we're talking about at its very basic level, is a connection point. So I know that's not quite your answer about responsibility. I do still believe it, but that's what we're talking about. That, and I know, because people often say, what is my responsibility if I'm worried about somebody? And I'll say, well, that's a basic human thing, isn't it? To look after your fellow human beings. Isn't that why we're here? And I think in our world, we're increasingly disconnected from people. We're sitting behind screens, or we're not going out very much. So it becomes almost more important to touch base with people, but it doesn't have to be, I'm sharing my entire life about where I was born and where I grew up and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? It can be just briefer than that.
Yeah. I'm Mick Hawes from Builders Business Black Belt. There's one roadblock in your business that, when identified and fixed, a whole bunch of other frustrating problems will disappear at the same time. So much time, effort, and money is thrown at problems in an attempt to fix them that often doesn't fix the problem and just leads to more frustration. And if this cycle continues, it increases stress and just makes running your own business an unenjoyable pain in the ass. And it doesn't have to be that way. Being a business owner can give you more time and financial freedom, and it can be super rewarding if you do it right. The key is to find your unique roadblock, which you're often too close to the action to see yourself. How do I know this? I've been working in peak performance and business coaching for over 3 decades, and with builders specifically for over 10 years, and I see it every day. So I encourage you to take the Builder's Success Scorecard right now. The link to take the scorecard is in the description. It's free. It'll take you about 90 seconds, and you'll have some quality feedback in your inbox before you know it. I think community is super important. Like, I notice it with Black Belt. So Black Belt is our community of builders that we coach, and the ones that interact with the community always seem to be improving their business a little more rapidly. Something goes wrong and people just go absent without leave, and when you finally catch up with them, they're in a lot of the time in a bad place. And if they were with the community, I think it's a great preventative for being in a community. But also having knowledge, I think, is really important. And you guys are putting together a program. I believe it's going to be an online program. And so I'd really like to unpack that and find out what that is all about, what it's focused on, what's its purpose, and then we can talk about the logistics of anyone who might be interested in jumping into that at some stage. So what was the thought behind it? How did this sort of all get started?
Okay. I'm going to seize an opportunity because just as Sonja was talking and you were talking, something came to mind about the responsibility bit that I'll just throw in.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you were listening to me and Sonja. That's
good. And that's the idea that, like, it sort of speaks to what we're doing. So in preparing, having conversations with people, one of the things that actually landed with me that someone said was, in our blurb, we've actually put in a piece there about to be available and connect with people and want to listen, and the words "and mean it."
Mm.
And that made me think of the responsibility bit as you were both talking, which is, I think it's about your responsibility is that if you say to someone, look, I can tell there's stuff going on, I'm really here for you, I want to listen to you, your responsibility is to think about, okay, how much do I mean that and how much can I actually offer that? And if I mean it, am I willing to actually hear stuff that might shock me, upset me as well? And so it's that type of responsibility, I think, is somewhere in the picture. Yeah. So really with what we're doing or looking at, so we're calling it Connect, Listen, Be With, because we feel like they're the key elements of what we're going to be talking about. So it's, how do you connect with someone? our idea initially is to do a little bit of work with neighbourhood houses and community centres, but then to look at groups of people. So like business people, tradespeople, health professionals. It could be in a whole range of locations, with the idea of building a community who have ways to think about that when I say, "G'day, how you going?" there's a bit more to how you connect, of like actually picking up how the other person seems, and also noticing how they respond to your "how are you?" And then flowing through into the listen part of like really listening to what they're saying, and then also being willing to spend, whether it's a few minutes or half an hour, to be with them. And this is the key part for us, is about it being mutual. It's not that you just have to be there for the other person, but it's okay to share what you're noticing or experiencing as they're talking to you. And that it creates this cycle then of being able to say, "Oh, hearing you talk, I'm noticing how much you're struggling, and that makes me feel a bit sad myself to hear that you're struggling so much." So being able to sort of put that in there to keep the connection and the listening going between the two of you. But our challenge is to look at how to do that on a continuum between short conversations that might be a 5-minute conversation in the street or on a building site or whatever it might be, through to a 5-minute conversation that becomes, "Hang on a moment, this sounds important. How about we just stop for a moment and take 15 minutes because I'm really interested to talk to you a bit more," and actually connect a bit more, listen a bit more, be with the person a little bit more. So that's sort of the basis. Sonja might want to riff off the back of that.
No, but what I was going to say is where what we're talking about differs quite a lot, I think, from some of the prevailing thinking out there. Is that space around listening is something it's nothing new. That active listening, reflecting back what you hear, etc. But we've taken that a step further, and we reflect and feel that the connecting with somebody is not just about listening, but being willing to give a little of yourself. So I have a relative who almost prides himself on the fact that he doesn't give much of himself away. And as a result, we've discussed it, other people don't share very much of themselves always either. And so he took a leaf out of the discussion we had, and he took the opportunity to chat with somebody, and he talked about stuff that was going on within a particular family member. And the person he spoke to suddenly felt okay about sharing some things that were going on for herself in her family. So there was actually an opportunity of being an opportunity to share in a way that felt safe. And sometimes people will feel safer about sharing what's going on if the person they're talking to is also willing to share a little bit of themselves. Having said that, it doesn't have to be anything deep and meaningful, but even just saying, I felt the same, or I've been in that situation, can sometimes open that door. So you are not the expert sitting there going, "Tell me everything and I'll fix it." That's not what it's about. But in talking something through or just mentioning it, sometimes that can help a person feel, okay, maybe things aren't that bad. There is somebody who's noticed and willing to hear, and they can choose if they want to share more or not.
Yeah. So with the program that you just mentioned, can you tell us what somebody participating in that might expect? Is it technique based? Is it understanding psychology? Is it a mixture of both? Is it stuff that I haven't even mentioned? what can we expect if we participate?
Okay, so for us, the emphasis on it being very real. So we will weave in talking about sort of some of the background to what we're sharing with people, but most of it is going to be trying to bring it into everyday conversation. So to give a little example, a starting point is to think about, and this is what we'd be doing in our workshop, is to think about when someone does greet you and says, "Hi, how are you?" the common thing we do is just have a pat answer to that and go, yeah, I'm fine. But what would happen if, when someone says, how are you, if you actually pause for a moment and honestly check in with yourself and go, yeah, how am I today? There might be more inclination to go, actually, I'm not too bad, but I'm a bit busy at present, and I'm noticing that I'm feeling a bit like I've got a lot going on. So it doesn't have to get into deep and meaningfuls, but it's just a pause, teaching people to pause and actually check in for themselves. Yeah, how am I? And then share it with the other person.
Yeah. We started off the conversation with talking about, people having dark thoughts and harming themselves or taking their lives and all of that sort of stuff, and learning how to get into a conversation in that space. But before we pressed the go button to record this, we talked about the value of just those conversations for business, and it really makes a lot of sense, and it's something that in Black Belt we talk about all the time, that learning how to communicate effectively with your prospects, with your clients, with your team members, with your suppliers, subcontractors, all that sort of stuff. It just makes for a better environment. So give me your thoughts on how you think what you're going to be covering in this workshop can just help from a general business perspective. It's not about, looking after people's mental health and all of that sort of stuff. So I guess we're looking at a preventative approach and a refinement approach for your business, not just, saving somebody's life, if they're in a dark place.
Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly, I think all of us can think of times. I always think about buying a car, and the pushy salesman who's saying a whole lot of stuff, and it's as though it's come from a template of some sort, and they're not genuine around what they're saying. So how do you create in a very short time a genuine connection and so the person I choose to buy my car from, often, unfortunately or fortunately, it would be a woman, but somebody who would take a slower approach, a more considered, who seems genuinely interested in what it is I want from a car, rather than saying a whole lot of words that don't mean anything. So when you are speaking to a potential client, of course they want to know, what are you going to charge, and do you have insurance, and all of that sort of thing. But actually, particularly when you're face to face, but also when you're over the phone, they're listening out to your tone of voice. They're listening. They're looking at you and how you're presenting physically. Are you connecting with them? Are you really hearing what they say? And that stuff Greg is really good at, noticing the body stuff. So having an opportunity to teach people how to notice that, and then to use that, if you like, when speaking with a potential client. You probably can explain more. You're better at.
Yeah. I think maybe an example, like when we were thinking about talking today, I was thinking about my experience of getting a solar system on my house down in Venus Bay here in Victoria, and getting quotes from different business people. But the company I went with was the company where there was just this different interaction. So, and I guess it's to some extent, maybe because of how I am, I started something, but the person with the electrician who was part of the company sort of picked up on that and went with it in a genuine way. And it was something like them arriving and him sort of saying, oh, g'day, how you going? How's your day been? And I did the honest thing that I've talked about, which I try and do as much as I can these days. And I just said, oh, yeah, not bad. I've had a few Zoom sessions for work, but I've got a bit of a break now. And then he asked what sort of work I did. When I said I worked as a grief counsellor, he sort of said, oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. I had an aunt a while back who had cancer, and that was a bit of a journey. And then it became conversations about, he used to, 15 years ago, he and his wife, their first house was the house 2 houses away from where I was. But then he sort of was able to go into, you know, talking to me about what I was looking for with the solar system. So it was a combination of business, but also two human beings having a conversation. And in the end, I paid a few $100s more, but I went with that company because I felt like I was more connected, but I also felt like this person gets it. And if I need to talk about things, I feel pretty comfortable talking to them. And that's how it played out. The whole time they were working on the property, they'd get on with the work, but we'd chat about other stuff as well, and backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
I think that's actually at the core of what we're talking about. And as you said, it's preventative, and it's not always at the pointy end of extreme levels of mental health, but it is about how do we think about building a community where people connect, and knowing that also that can actually be useful for your business, as well as you're looking after other people's mental health at a level.
And your own.
Yeah, and your own, absolutely. I mean, having these conversations, when someone says, "How are you?" you can get to take that pause as you recommended, and go, not so flash, you know. And at least if you become aware of it, you can do something about it rather than just wandering off in your daily trance as we do.
And
logistics.
Are you okay day as well? Because we know that was one of the things that came out of the idea of Are You Okay, that everybody now knows. There's no point just going, are you okay? And then walking away. You actually need to create a pause and an opportunity for people to really, and you have to be genuinely interested. You can't just ask a question and not care what they're going to say. They'll know that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Logistics. People that are listening to this and understand that it's important from, you know, a mental health point of view for their business, but it's also a really valuable skill set and mindset to refine to improve business, because the one thing that we know for sure and certain is that businesses that focus on quality of relationship and quality of experience versus just a transactional relationship are always far more successful. So this makes total sense to me that it's something that is an important and valuable improvement to any business. So someone listening to this goes, yep, I agree with that. I want to find out more logistics. How do we do that? What's the best way to get in contact or show their interest to want to participate in the workshop?
So we've got a LinkedIn page, and it's called Connect, Listen, Be With, and we can send that to you as well. And on that page, what we'll do following this is put up a bit of a flyer, I suppose, and I'll create a QR code so people can register interest. And I don't know which is the best way to do it. We can certainly come up with a date, or perhaps we'll get a sense of people who might be interested. And following that, we can come up with a date and a time that might suit those people who indicate interest.
Perfect. Well, we'll put we'll make sure we put that link in the description. And if you've got a QR code, I'm not sure what we can do with that, but we can definitely put a link in the description. I'm not sure how we go putting a QR code in the description. That might be above our pay grade. So
we can do that from our end. We can do that from.
Yeah. So as long as we put people in touch with you, and they can reach out to you via the LinkedIn page, that should do the job.
Sounds great.
And I think too, you know, the important thing for people to know is we want to do this in a way where we walk the walk. So it would also be anyone reaching out to us. It's not just a standard package. Like, yes, there's key parts that we can help people understand what we feel are normal human skills, but it's highlighting how to access those human skills, but also tailoring the workshops to each place that we go into. So being able to, someone reaches out to us and says, yep, like you to come out and do some work with us, we'd be doing this stuff of saying, okay, we actually want to connect with you. We want to listen to what's going on. How do we tailor it to make sense to...
Yeah, so we could go to an organisation. If there was an organisation listening and they would like to have a chat further with us, more than happy to have, and we would want to do that anyway.
Yeah. Absolutely. So best place to go is the LinkedIn page. So thank you both very much for jumping on the podcast. It's wonderful to talk to people that have a passion about what they're doing, and it's obvious that both of you are very passionate about what you're doing. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much for having us, Mick.
Thanks a lot, Mick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to meet. That is it for this episode. I hope this got you thinking. It certainly always gets me thinking about that whole responsibility thing. And I guess being responsible can be affected by what you know and what you practice and what you rehearse and how you think and that sort of stuff. And I just, a little while ago, I was cajoled into doing another first aid course to get a certificate to teach people how to sail keelboats for our yacht club. And as I was in that first aid course, I was learning a bunch, and I thought, this is really important. Everyone should do this. But before I was forced into it, I didn't give it a second thought. And it's like, if you don't have these skills, it's a little bit too late when you need them. And I think what we've just been talking to Sonja and Greg about falls in that same category. I would imagine that if you get involved in it, you start to understand these skills and practice these skills, you'll go, everybody should know this. From a, as I say, a preventative point of view for helping people in a dark place, but also just a refinement perspective to run a better business. These skills are really, really important. So we'll make sure we put the link in the description to reach out on LinkedIn. I hope this got you thinking. We'll be back with another episode of the ToolShed. Before you know it, I'm Mick Hawes from Builders Business Black Belt. That is all. I'm out. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the ToolShed. If this podcast struck a chord with you, make sure you spread the word by sharing it with your mates in the building industry. We love your help to make the building industry better for everyone involved.